Chapter 20. Triumphant Sleuths. For one long moment, the Hardy brothers were too stunned to speak. "Not Chet! It can't be true!" Joe faltered at last. "We mustn't believe the story," Frank told him, his voice trembling. "We must get out of here and learn the truth." Together, the two boys moved up to the grating to study the only possible escape route, past the dangerous puma and out the far door. The beast gave a menacing growl as it stalked to the bars. "Let's take off our socks, shirts, belts, and sweaters," Frank commanded. "I have a plan." In a moment, the two boys were squatting, stripped to the waist, before a heap of clothing. "There's one thing that every animal respects," muttered Frank. The youth doubled the heavy belts together for a stiff core, and then began wrapping the sweaters and shirts round them. "Fire!" Joe exclaimed, catching on. "You're making a torch." "What about matches?" "After Donner's lecture about preparedness, I vowed I'd never be without them," Frank returned, drawing a watertight cylinder from his pocket. A match flared in the dark, square room. The puma growled apprehensively. Slowly the flame crawled up the impromptu torch, growing brighter and brighter until it was a ball of fire. Panicky now, the big cat loped back and forth, snarling viciously. "Now while it lasts," cried Frank. "Yank that chain, Joe." With a scraping sound, the iron bars rose upward. Holding the flaring torch before him, Frank advanced upon the puma, plunging, snarling with fear, and raising its powerful paws, the beast backed through the outer door, which Joe had opened. "It's working!" Frank cried as he too stepped outside. But at that very instant Joe was seized by powerful arms from behind. The snarls of the puma and the sound of the chain had warned the hijackers. "Saki!" shouted Donner. "Get that other one!" "Keep going, Frank!" Joe shouted. One backward glance told Frank what was happening. Joe was going down under two attackers, and one was coming for him. Desperately, Frank rushed forward and hurled the ball of flame straight into the puma's snarling face. Maddened, the big cat turned tail and plunged for the freedom of the woods. Frank by now was sprinting at top speed in another direction. Saki emerged, hesitated, and started off in pursuit. Meanwhile, Joe was slowly regaining consciousness after being dealt a stunning blow. His head throbbed. His wrists and ankles stung where the ropes cut into his flesh. He was on the damp floor, bound hand and foot. "Now what kind of accident can we arrange for these two?" It was Donner speaking. Opening his eyes, Joe saw that he'd been moved to Captain McGuire's cell. The captain, also bound, lay above him on the cot. A hijacker stood over the two with a pistol, while Walter Donner, holding a lantern aloft in one hand, coolly plotted their murder. "Perhaps a nice hot fire that won't leave any evidence," the gang leader suggested. "And we mustn't forget to include your brother, if Saki gets to him before the puma does." "Hands up!" came a sudden sharp command. "Drop that gun." Wheeling, Donner found himself covered by a Tommy gun. Two state troopers stood in the doorway where he and Weber had surprised the Hardys earlier. As Donner's pistol clattered to the floor, he swung his lantern viciously at the nearest officer. There was a crash and total darkness for a moment. In the confusion, the wily gang leader slipped through the passage into the puma's cage and dashed to freedom. Frank, meanwhile, had kept sprinting through the woods. He weaved in and out, seeking always to keep some trees between himself and his pursuer. Now and then a pistol cracked behind him, and a heavy bullet thumped into a tree or ripped into the leaves over his head. Completely drenched from the flight through the underbrush, Frank reached the rocky side of the hollow and clambered upward. A bullet exploded in the rock beside him, sending painful splinters into his hand. Realizing that he was too exposed on the open slope, in the pale light of early dawn, Frank ducked behind a big rock and waited. As the burly Saki toiled upward in the gray light, Frank lunged toward him in a tremendous football tackle. The heavily built man went down with a crash, still clutching his revolver in one hand. Desperately, Frank grabbed the man's wrist, knowing that control of the gun meant life or death. Locked together, the two struggling bodies rolled down the steep slope, bouncing from one level to another. Finally, Saki rolled on top and raised his weapon. But at this moment, a figure hurled out of nowhere, knocking the hijacker's head against a stone and wresting the pistol from him all in one movement. "Simon!" cried Frank joyously. "How'd you—" But the mute boy only indicated by pointing upward that Frank should continue climbing. "You're right, Simon. I must get help." Once more, Frank clambered toward the road at the top. By now, it was very light, though the sun had not risen. Frank, looking around, suddenly spotted a man not 50 yards above him and going in the same direction. Walter Donner! The gang leader turned, and for a moment he and the young detective stared at each other. Frank set himself for another struggle, but to his astonishment, Donner turned and began climbing upward again as fast as he could. Calling on his muscles for one last all-out effort, Frank scrambled upward in pursuit. In another minute, Frank hauled himself to a ledge. Now Donner's legs dangled just above him. Thinking of Chet, lying entangled in a wrecked car, Frank pulled the man down savagely. But a snarl from the ledge just above him, and the sudden terrified scream from Donner, checked his poised fist. Instinctively, Frank pressed both himself and his antagonist against the rock wall. As 200 pounds of furious puma hurtled past within inches of their heads. Landing off balance, the beast skidded and tumbled rapidly downhill. Donner jerked loose, but Frank quickly sent a swift punch to the man's midsection, following it up with a smashing blow to the jaw. "That's for Chet," he panted, as Donner slumped unconscious. "Hi, up there!" came shouts from below. Looking down, Frank saw that the rocky slope was swarming with state troopers. 3 of them were throwing a net over the spitting, scrambling puma. Several others had almost reached Frank himself. "Nice work, boy!" cried the first trooper to come up. "Donner nearly got away." Brushing aside the congratulations, Frank asked urgently, "Is my brother Joe all right? Have you examined the auto wreck?" The friendly trooper looked puzzled. "Joe Hardy? Sure, he's okay, but I don't know what wreck you're talking about." Quickly, Frank scrambled back down to the valley floor. "I'll get Joe, and we'll look for Chet," he thought, while jogging swiftly along the trees to the Donner cabin. The door of the stone cabin was wide open, and Frank dashed in, and then stopped short in utter astonishment. An appetizing aroma, the sizzle of bacon frying in a pan, the sound of happy voices all talking at once reached him from the kitchen. Frank opened his mouth and stood in speechless wonder. Joe and Captain McGuire were standing by the secret door laughing. Seated at the kitchen table were Simon and Fenton Hardy, and presiding over the stove, flipping pancakes vigorously into the air and talking loudly the whole time, was Chet Morton. "Frank," his father cried out, "so good to see you. I'm certainly glad this case is solved." "You knew?" One of the troopers sent a shortwave message that you were safe and Donner was captured. But, Chet! What? How? Frank stammered. Nothing to be amazed about, said Chet, as the others, grinning, made a place for Frank at the table. Old Chet went for the police and brought him back, that's all. But the smashed car, you weren't in it? Right, just a little detective's trick, the stout boy shrugged, with an attempt at modesty. I had a little head start on that hijacker, so I hid the convertible in some trees near that jalopy we saw. I put in a blanket and set the old crate on fire and shoved it off the bluff. Chet beamed. Did it burn? That Saki thought I was in it? I waited till he'd gone, drove on down Rim Road without lights, and called the state police from the first house with a phone. I told them to come ready for a wild animal, as well as criminals. When they got here, I showed the police the secret chute in the cabin, and they did the rest. They rounded up all the crooks. You're a real trooper for sure, Frank said. We couldn't solve a mystery without you. That proved to be true in the boy's next case, the Viking symbol mystery. As for me, Fenton Hardy took up the story, I hurried over here from New Jersey, right after I quizzed that pair that you boys caught in the station wagon. Just by luck, I was at the state police barracks when Chet's call came in. This is the gang that you've been after, then? Frank asked. Sure is, his father answered. And they're all behind bars now. Weber's shoes matched the cast taken by Sheriff Ecker, so he confessed to setting the cabin on fire, hiding nearby, and seeing you boys escape. We found the cache of hijacked goods in 2 of the underground passages. Weber has also confessed to selling everything but the missile nose cones as property of a fictitious company which were going out of business. A clever racket that he worked with the auctioneer in New York City. Joe added, and he was holding up the settlement of the Donner estate until he and Walter had disposed of all the hijacked goods. The gang confessed that they did take that hound dog and kept it for their own use. Saki was the one who spied on us in the woods, and also on Weber. Donner didn't even trust his own men. By the way, William and his sister, they're innocent in any part of this racket. Well, my job's over now, concluded Mr. Hardy, and you 3 boys did the major part of it for me, which means you get the major share of the credit, too. And the major share of the reward money, too. And they certainly deserve it, Captain McGuire put in fervently. My share is going to Simon, Frank declared immediately. Dad, perhaps his voice could be restored through surgery? Joe and Chet instantly seconded Frank's decision. I'm sure medical science can do something, Fenton Hardy answered. Some very successful mechanical speaking devices have been developed. If it should turn out his voice can't be restored in any other way. In any case, we can send him to art school. I understand that he has a fine talent for drawing. That's for sure, Chet said with admiration, as Simon's eyes shone with gratitude. I'll have all the reward I want out of this case, if I can keep mystery. But say, I want to make sure that Miss Donner gives Skippy back to that little Bobby Thompson. It'll be done, Chet, Mr. Hardy promised. Well, that just leaves the puma, said Joe. We'll give him to a zoo. They can put a sign up over his cage. This animal was once known and feared as the Screaming Witch of Black Hollow. How about adding a couple owls? Chet suggested. Boy, that screeching really gave me the creeps. End of The Clue of the Screeching Owl, a Hardy Boys novel by Franklin W. Dixon.